Okay, forget digging in the dirt for fossils. Picture this. Scientists finding early human remains, Homo erectus skull bits, actually on the seabed.
Yeah, it sounds pretty wild, doesn't it?
It really does. We're talking the floor of the Madura Strait, right off Surabaya in Indonesia.
Hmm.
And this whole area, it used to be dry land, part of this huge landmass called Sundaland.
Exactly, Sundaland. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Totally.
And what's really amazing here isn't just, one or two bones. This deep dive, it's about this massive haul, over 6,000 vertebrate fossils.
6,000.
Yeah, including those Homo erectus fragments, all pulled from this river valley that's now underwater in the Madura Strait. Just think about the story that tells.
Wow, 6,000 fossils. That really paints a picture of, well, a whole ancient world down there. And I gather this is a pretty big deal for understanding early human history in Southeast Asia.
Oh, absolutely. A game changer, really. This submerged landscape, Sundaland, it was super important for how early humans spread out and evolved. And this is actually our first proper look, our first vertebrate fossil record from that specific underwater part of Sundaland.
The first one.
Precisely. And for you listening, our mission here is to really unpack this discovery. We want to get into the geology, how this valley formed and got submerged,
Okay.
figure out the age of these fossils, reconstruct what that environment was actually like for these early humans, and what it all means for Homo erectus in this region.
And we're basing this on that study you shared, the one in quaternary environments in humans.
That's the one, yeah. We want to get you up to speed on what they found quickly, but, properly.
Great. So first things first, fossils on the seabed. How does that even happen? Were people diving for them?
No, not quite like that. The discovery itself is, well, quite the story. It happened between 2014 and 2015. There was this huge marine sand dredging operation.
Dredging? For what?
Land reclamation near Surabaya. They pulled up something like 5 million cubic meters of sand from the bottom of the strait.
5 million cubic meters. That is a staggering amount of sand. Talk about an accidental discovery.
Exactly. It was completely unintentional. As they were processing all this dredged sand, these fossils just started showing up.
Just mixed in with the sand.
Yep, over 6,000 of them. Fish, reptiles, mammals, a whole range of stuff.
Yeah.
And right in there, these 2 bits of Homo erectus skull.
Incredible. So a byproduct of major construction, essentially. And you mentioned Sundaland again. Why is that location, that ancient landmass, so critical?
Well, think back to the ice ages, the Pleistocene. Sea levels were way, way lower.
Right, because water was locked up in glaciers.
Exactly. So Sundaland wasn't islands like today. It was this vast, continuous plain connecting mainland Asia to places like Java, Sumatra, Borneo.
Like a land bridge.
A massive one, yeah.
Yeah.
It was habitat, but also a highway, basically.
Mm.
A key route for animals and, well, early humans like Homo erectus to move across the region.
So the big takeaway is they weren't stuck on Java.
That's a key point. They were likely moving across this much larger territory. It changes how we think about their migrations, their interactions.
Okay, that makes sense. So they weren't isolated. Now, this ancient river valley you mentioned, where did the fossils actually come from within that submerged landscape?
The geology is really key here. The research suggests these fossils were in sandstones that filled up an old river valley.
An ancient river valley.
Okay. And not just any river, but probably an ancient course of the Solo River. One of Java's biggest rivers today. This whole valley system is now under the Madura Strait.
A sunken river valley. How can they be sure about that? It's all underwater.
Good question. They used a few methods. One is called sub-bottom profiling.
Okay, what's that?
It's kind of like using sound waves.
Hmm.
A boat sends pulses down, they bounce off the layers beneath the seabed, and you get this picture of what's buried, like an ultrasound for the seafloor.
Ah.
They saw this clear channel shape cut into the older clays, filled with sand. Plus, they had data from deep drilling nearby for the Suramadu Bridge, other projects. It all pointed to this buried river channel.
So multiple lines of evidence showing a definite ancient riverbed, not just random sand.
Exactly. And the thinking is, this valley was carved out way back when sea levels were really low during a major glacial period. The Solo River would have flowed much further out across that exposed Sundaland plain.
Makes sense. And then how did it get filled up with the sand and the fossils?
Well, the study describes this sequence. First, as the river cut the valley, you'd get coarser stuff, gravel, a basal conglomerate left at the bottom.
Okay, the heavy stuff.
Right. Then as the ice age ended and sea level started rising, the river flow would slow down and the valley would start to backfill with sand carried by the river. These are the fluvial sandstones. That's likely where many of the land animal fossils ended up.
Trapped in the river sand as the water rose.
Pretty much. And then as the sea kept rising and eventually flooded the whole valley, you get marine sands deposited on top, showing that transition to more of an estuary where the river meets the sea.
Right, a whole cycle. Erosion, then filling as the sea came back in. Okay, the big question then. Dating. How do they get to that figure of around 140,000 years old?
They used a technique called OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, on those fluvial sandstones, the ones with the fossils.
OSL, how does that work, basically?
It measures the last time the sand grains were exposed to sunlight. So basically when they were buried.
Okay, and what did the dates show?
They got two main results from those layers.
Wow.
One around 162,000 years ago, plus or minus about 31,000 years.
Right.
And another at 119,000 years ago, plus or minus 27,000 years.
So quite a wide range there. How do they narrow that down to the 140,000 number?
They connect those dates to the bigger picture of global climate, specifically the marine isotope stages, or MIS.
Ah, yes, MIS. These are like chapters in the Earth's recent climate history, right? Based on ocean core data?
Exactly. They show the cycles of glacials and interglacials and the corresponding sea level changes. The timing of this valley filling fits really well with the end of the MIS-6 glacial period, a time of very low sea level, and the subsequent rise into the warm MIS-5 interglacial.
Okay, so matching the geology to the known climate timeline.
Precisely. And when you look at the overlap in those OSL date ranges, the researchers calculate the most likely age range for the fossils is between about 146,000 and 131,000 years ago. So around 140,000 is a good midpoint.
That's pretty neat how they can bracket the age like that. What about the marine sand on top? Did they date that?
They tried. They got a much older date, a minimum age of over 460,000 years, but with a huge uncertainty.
Whoa, much older. Why?
The researchers think that sample probably contained older sand grains that got washed in and mixed up as the sea finally flooded the valley. So it's likely reworked material, not reflecting the time the marine layer was actually deposited.
Okay, so the key dates for the Homo erectus and the ecosystem really come from those river sands, the fluvial ones.
That seems most reliable, yes.
So if we're talking roughly 140,000 years ago, what was Sundaland like then? What kind of world were these early humans living in?
The fossils themselves give us a fantastic glimpse. The range of animals is really striking. You've got elephants, different kinds of bovids like ancient cattle or buffalo, rhinos, even hippos, which, are long gone from this part of the world.
Hippos. In Indonesia. Wow, that is surprising. Definitely not the image I have.
Right. It really shifts the picture. Plus, things like Komodo dragons, which are now only on a few islands, and river sharks, which are also very rare there today. The hippo presence alone tells you it was a very different place.
So what does that whole collection suggest about the landscape? Not dense rainforest.
Probably not, or at least not everywhere. Based on that mix of animals, the thinking is it was likely more similar to an African savanna.
Really? Like grasslands?
Yeah, relatively dry grasslands maybe, with forests probably concentrated along the rivers and water sources.
And those rivers, they must have been absolutely critical.
Oh, completely vital. For water, obviously. But also for food, shellfish, fish, plants along the banks. And as we said, they were the main routes, the corridors, for moving across this vast lowland plain, for humans and animals alike.
So these Homo erectus populations, they were mobile, following these river systems across this savanna-like landscape that really does counter that old idea of them being isolated on Java, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the fossils give us behavioral clues, too. They found cut marks on some turtle bones.
Ah, butchery evidence.
Yes, and also lots of broken bovid bones, suggesting they were cracking them open.
For the marrow.
Exactly. Standard practice for getting at that rich, fatty marrow. It points to active hunting and processing of these animals.
And you mentioned something earlier about this hunting possibly being different, maybe more advanced than earlier Homo erectus in Java.
Yes, that's a really interesting angle. This evidence for seemingly hunting healthy, large bovids. It's maybe clearer here than in some older Javanese sites.
Sure.
Now, this kind of hunting strategy is something we see more clearly with later hominins, maybe on mainland Asia. So it raises this tantalizing possibility. Could there have been some kind of contact?
Contacts between different groups, like these Sundaland Homo erectus learning from others.
It's speculative, of course, but it's a possibility the evidence hints at. Maybe interaction, maybe even some gene flow. It makes you wonder how connected these ancient populations really were, perhaps learning new behaviors from each other.
Wow. Fossils from the seabed potentially hinting at cultural or genetic exchange between different early human groups. That's pretty
It
profound.
really opens up new questions.
Okay, let's circle back to the Solo River. You said this submerged valley is likely part of it. How does this connect to the Homo erectus sites we already know about on Java?
That's the crucial link. The study argues strongly that this underwater valley lines up with where the Solo River would have flowed across the Sundaland shelf during that low sea level period.
So it's like finding the lost downstream section of the river.
Exactly. And the Solo River Valley on Java is famous for its Homo erectus sites, Ngandong, Trinil. You've probably heard of them.
Yes, definitely.
Well, the really interesting thing is the age. This Madura Strait site, around 140,000 years old, is roughly in the same ballpark as the ages estimated for those Ngandong and Trinil terrace sites further upstream.
So it suggests these weren't just random finds, but part of this whole population living along the Solo River system around the same time.
It certainly looks that way. It ties this submerged record directly to the known terrestrial record.
Were the environments likely the same all along the river, though, from Trinil down to the coast?
Probably some differences. Ngandong and Trinil are more inland in the sort of middle uplifted section of the river's course.
Okay.
The Madura Strait site, though, was way down in the lowlands, much closer to the ancient coast. So you might expect differences in, say, river speed, vegetation, maybe in the exact mix of animals because of rainfall patterns or proximity to the sea.
Right. So same river system, but potentially different local conditions influencing how Homo erectus lived in the uplands versus the lowlands. That adds another layer to their adaptability.
Yes, and I.
Stepping back then, what's the really big picture significance here beyond just finding more Homo erectus fossils?
Well, for one, it gives us this incredible window into the biodiversity of ancient Southeast Asia. Many of those animals found, as we said, they're extinct now or highly endangered. It helps us understand that deep history.
A baseline for a lost world.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And it also reinforces that this period, the late Middle Pleistocene, was really dynamic in East Asia. You had different hominins around, lots of movement.
And the Madura Strait area itself seems like it was a hotspot.
It seems likely. You had two major rivers, the Solo and the Brantus, converging near there during low sea levels. That would have created a really resource-rich area, attractive for humans and lots of other animals.
So not just a pathway, but a destination or rich habitat.
Very likely. It really underscores how important these now drowned landscapes were in the whole story of evolution in this region, including our own ancestors.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up for you, our listener. This deep dive into the Madura Strait fossils. It's been pretty eye-opening. We've learned the seabed there holds the first actual fossil evidence from submerged Sundaland, including those really key Homo erectus fragments.
Yep, about 140,000 years old.
Right, roughly 140,000 years old, found in what used to be the Solo River Valley. And back then, Sundaland wasn't islands, but this huge savanna-like landscape.
Teeming with wildlife, yeah. Elephants, hippos, the works. A crucial place for Homo erectus to live and move through.
And these finds are giving us new clues about how they lived, how they hunted, and maybe, just maybe, hinting at interactions with other early human groups.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it? How much of those massive sea level changes, the drowning and uncovering of these landscapes, must have shaped human evolution in Southeast Asia.
Absolutely. And what else might still be down there, under the waves?
Exactly. What other secrets are preserved? It also pushes you to consider the real possibility of contact and exchange between different hominin groups back then. We tend to think of them in isolation, but maybe they weren't always.
That's a really provocative thought to end on, and it sounds like this story isn't over. You mentioned more research coming.
That's right. The team indicated more publications are planned. They'll apparently go deeper into the specific animal fossils, the taphonomy, how everything got preserved, and give a more detailed look at the Homo erectus finds themselves.
So definitely more to come from this underwater window into our past.
For sure. It shows, doesn't it? There's still so much we're learning about our own history in vast areas like the seabed that we're only just beginning to explore.